So I'm sure you're just like anyone else who follows the true crime genre. If so, even if you're casually following it, you've seen that Christopher Watts' name has been in the news lately. Quite a few people have reached out and asked me if I was going to do a video update on Christopher Watts and the story that he is now placing blame on, well, his whore. I don't know how else to put it, but Jezebel, as he supposedly called her in the actual letters. This is Nicole Kissinger. He's placing blame on her for why he killed his wife, his two little girls, and his unborn son, baby Nico. He's placing blame on her now. And people want to know, why have I not covered this story? Because it boils down to just this, ladies and gentlemen. This is not the first person who's come forward and said that they have letters from Chris Watts, that they had evidence that they wanted to share. And they're not the first person even who said that they're going to be writing a book about the communications that they have with Christopher Watts, or communication they had with Christopher Watts. Christopher Watts, is old news. The man is a pathetic little man. The only person, the only people he was ever going to be able to hurt was his defenseless wife, his two little girls, and his unborn son. That is the facts. If all these years later he wants to place blame on Nicole Kissinger, his whore, his Jezebel, if you will, then go ahead. But keep this in mind. As we go forward, and if this ever comes to fruition, where this individual takes his letters and is able to finally get a book published on his time in prison with Christopher Watts, the communications he had with him, if he's ever able to do that, just keep in mind that Christopher Watts has been an habitual liar for most of his adult life. Long before he ever killed his wife and his little girls and his unborn son, he was an habitual liar. He was somewhat of a con man as well. Then it all came to that one fateful night where he killed Shanann and then buried her in a shallow grave outside of the containment wall near the tanks where he was going to be working that day with his crew. And then he took his two little girls, suffocated them one by one, and then shoved them through a very small metal pipe into the oil tanks that would be filled with oil in the days ahead. He knew that no one would look in those tanks for a year because the week prior, each of those tanks had been certified for another 12 months of use without any leaks being detected. He knew this. It would be 12 months. He knew eventually that they would come back and they were going to find his little girls in the tanks. Oil doesn't dissolve a human being. It preserves it. It encases it. Think of the bogmen that they found in the UK. That's kind of what, someone who had fallen into, oil would do. Kind of like the little Brea tar pits in California. It preserves. He would have been caught eventually, and he would never have had any way of explaining how did someone get into the oil field to do this. Because see, I've seen a lot of other speculation out there around this case that there was no security there at the tanks and then on the oil field where he disposed of his family. It's not true. It's not even close to being true. See, Christopher Watts knew, because of his inside information, when the security would be by for their patrols. He knew how long he had to dispose of them all while he was there, before his work crew would show up that day. He knew this information from his inside knowledge of how the operations worked. There is security. It is a controlled area. He couldn't just drive in there, nor could you drive in there today. But now, again, we have another individual saying that they have letters that were written by Christopher Watts. In some biblical terms, he's saying that she, lured him away with the sweet nectar of honey of her perfume. I don't care how he puts it. I don't care what Christopher Watts has to say. The damage has been done already. He killed Shanann. He killed Cece. He killed baby Bella. And he killed his unborn son. The sooner we all forget who Christopher Watts is and leave him in the past, the sooner we can all move forward. His family, the Ruszczyks and the Watts, are still suffering to this day over what he did. The community at large in the Weld County is suffering for what he did to this very day. Because people keep on bringing him up, asking more and more ridiculous questions like, how could he have done it? Why didn't they charge his little whore for her involvement in the entire crime? And just a side note on that. If there was even a shred of evidence that they could have gone after her and proven that she was part of the actual crime, they would have charged her. There was no reason, and no one's money, not even Daddy's money, would have gotten her out of it. They would have charged her if they felt, even for a second, that she was guilty of something. Nicole Kissinger, she was a whore. She probably still is a whore. And I'm sorry you don't like my language. I tell it exactly how it is. I have studied this case since the day it came out. I know far more than some of the people out there who have written books about this, who've made made-for-TV movies about it. I know more about his life than I ever care to remember. I have files from the day one, documents from the courts. I have everything. I know more about him, again, than I ever care to know. So please, if I don't cover Christopher Watts and the story of someone else writing a book about letters or communication they had with him in jail, in prison, then please forgive me. I have much better things to do with my life, like pay respect to Shanann, Bella, Cece, and baby Nico. And I would hope that you would take a moment of your life today after watching this video and sit down and say, maybe, just maybe, that's what we really should be doing. Honoring the victims and not the perpetrator.